The radio crackled through static at 3:47 hours, Mountain Standard Time. "Control, this is Overwatch 7. We have a problem." Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen's voice carried the weight of disbelief, the kind that makes seasoned operators question everything they thought they knew about warfare. Through his scope, 1,200 meters across the Afghan valley, he watched something that shouldn't exist. The enemy squad, 8 Taliban fighters who had been systematically eliminating NATO forces for 3 months, lay motionless in positions that defied tactical logic, not scattered by panic, not torn apart by explosive ordnance. Simply gone, precise, clinical, as if death had visited with a surgeon's touch rather than a soldier's fury. "Overwatch 7, clarify your status," came the response from Forward Operating Base Kandahar. Major Patricia Williams leaned forward in the command center, her weathered hands gripping the radio console. 23 years of military service had taught her to recognize the impossible when she heard it. "Control, we have 8 confirmed KIA, targets eliminated by unknown friendly." Chen's breathing was audible through the comm system. Negative visual on supporting assets. Repeat, no friendlies in the operational area. The silence that followed stretched like a held breath across the Tactical Operations Center. Williams glanced at the digital map display showing the remote valley, a place so isolated that even the goat herders avoided it. The nearest coalition forces were 47 kilometers away, and the drone coverage had gone dark 30 minutes before the engagement. Lieutenant Colonel James Rodriguez, the base commander, stepped closer to the communications station. His jaw worked silently as he processed the implications. 3 months ago, they'd lost Bravo Company's forward element in that same valley. 2 weeks later, a Special Forces reconnaissance team had vanished without a trace. The Taliban squad responsible had become something of a legend, ghosts who struck fast and disappeared faster, leaving only empty brass and cold bodies behind. "Overwatch 7, what's your assessment of the elimination method?" Rodriguez's question hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Chen's reply came after a long pause. "Sir, it looks like precision rifle work, multiple angles, impossible angles actually, sir, there's something else." The radio hissed with interference. "The targets are arranged in a pattern, like someone was making a statement." Williams felt ice forming in her chest. In 2 decades of combat operations, she'd seen talented snipers work magic with mathematics and wind calculations. But this wasn't talent. This was something else entirely, something that made grown men whisper prayers and question the nature of warfare itself. The morning light was beginning to creep across the mountains, and with it would come answers that nobody was prepared to handle. The war in Afghanistan had just taken a turn that would redefine everything they thought they knew about the enemy, about their allies, and about the thin line between legend and reality. Major Patricia Williams stared at the topographical map spread across the metal table, her fingers tracing the elevation lines of the valley where 8 Taliban fighters had met their end. The morning briefing tent buzzed with subdued conversations, but her focus remained locked on the coordinates that defied explanation. Satellite imagery showed no vehicle tracks, no aircraft signatures, no evidence of how death had arrived so precisely in such an isolated location. "Ma'am, we've got movement." Sergeant First Class David Kim approached with a tablet displaying drone footage. Single individual, moving northwest from the engagement site, approximately 5 clicks from Overwatch 7's position. Williams studied the grainy black and white feed. A lone figure moved across the rocky terrain with practiced efficiency, carrying what appeared to be a long rifle case. The person's gait suggested military training, but the body language was wrong for standard infantry movement. Too smooth, too confident for someone operating alone in hostile territory. "Can we get a closer look?" she asked, adjusting her headset as Rodriguez joined them at the table. The drone operator, a young specialist whose name tag read Morrison, manipulated the camera controls with delicate precision. The image zoomed in, revealing a figure in standard military fatigues with no visible unit insignia. The person moved like water across the landscape, never hesitating, never checking surroundings with the paranoid intensity that kept soldiers alive in combat zones. "Sir, that's not how you move in Indian country," Rodriguez muttered, using the old military term for hostile territory. "Nobody walks that calm unless they own the ground they're on." Williams nodded grimly. She'd spent enough time in combat zones to recognize the difference between confidence and stupidity. This figure moved with the former, the kind of bone-deep assurance that came from superior training, superior equipment, or superior intelligence about enemy positions. "Morrison, can you track the route?" she asked. The specialist's fingers danced across his control panel. "Already on it, ma'am. Tracking software shows the individual originated from grid reference 41RQP 23840 719,385. That's," he paused, cross-referencing his maps. "That's the abandoned observation post on Hill 394. Williams felt her blood chill. Hill 394 had been evacuated 6 months ago after a mortar attack that killed 3 Marines. The position had been deemed too dangerous to maintain, too isolated to defend, and too strategically insignificant to reclaim. Intelligence reports suggested the Taliban had turned it into a weapons cache. "Ma'am," Kim interrupted quietly, "that hill has direct line of sight to the engagement area, range approximately 800 meters." The mathematics of long-range shooting began forming in Williams's mind. 800 meters was within the capability envelope of several weapon systems, but achieving the precision that Chen had described would require exceptional skill, perfect equipment, and intimate knowledge of environmental conditions. The morning wind patterns in that valley were notoriously unpredictable, creating thermals and downdrafts that could deflect even the most carefully aimed rounds. Rodriguez leaned closer to the display. "Morrison, I want thermal imaging on that hill, full spectrum analysis. If someone's been living up there, there'll be heat signatures, equipment caches, something." The drone banked gracefully, its sensors reconfiguring for thermal detection. What they saw next would challenge everything they understood about modern warfare. The thermal imaging revealed what conventional optics had missed, a carefully constructed hide site that spoke of professional military engineering. Heat signatures showed the remnants of a warming fire, precisely controlled to minimize smoke signatures. Equipment caches were arranged with the methodical organization of someone who understood the importance of rapid deployment and immediate extraction. "Jesus Christ," Rodriguez whispered, his command voice reduced to something approaching reverence. "Look at those sight lines." Morrison adjusted the display, overlaying topographical data onto the thermal image. The hide site commanded perfect visibility across 3 separate valleys, with clear firing positions that offered multiple egress routes. Whoever had constructed this position understood advanced military tactics better than most special forces operators. Williams studied the layout with growing unease. "Morrison, show me the ballistic trajectories from this position to the engagement site." The specialist worked quickly, his software calculating bullet flight paths based on elevation, distance, and environmental factors. Red lines appeared on the screen, each one representing a potential shot from the hide site to the valley floor where the Taliban squad had died. "Ma'am, the angles are." Morrison's voice trailed off as the implications became clear. "Impossible," Rodriguez finished. "You'd need to be shooting through a 30-degree downward angle with compensation for crosswind, thermal layering, and altitude variance. That's not marksmanship, that's witchcraft." Williams had seen exceptional shooting during her career. She'd worked alongside Marine scout snipers whose abilities bordered on supernatural Army Rangers who could thread needles at 600 meters, and Navy SEALs whose precision under pressure defied physics. But the shooting described in Chen's report exceeded anything in her experience. "Sir, there's something else," Kim added, pointing to a section of the thermal display. "Look at the equipment signature." The screen showed the heat pattern of sophisticated optical equipment, scopes, range-finding devices, and what appeared to be advanced ballistic computers. Military-grade hardware that wasn't available through standard supply channels, equipment that cost more than most soldiers made in 5 years. Who the hell has access to gear like that? Rodriguez asked the question that everyone was thinking. Williams stared at the display, her mind racing through possibilities. Special operations units had advanced equipment, but they operated under strict command structures with detailed mission parameters. Intelligence agencies had resources and autonomy, but they typically avoided direct action that could compromise their operations. Foreign military advisors had capability, but their presence would generate significant political complications. "Ma'am, we're getting another transmission from Overwatch 7, Morrison announced, his voice cutting through the speculation. Williams grabbed her headset. "Overwatch 7, this is Control. Send your traffic." Chen's voice came through clearly, but there was something different in his tone, a mixture of professional respect and personal bewilderment. "Control, we have additional intelligence on the eliminated targets. They were carrying advanced communications equipment, detailed maps of coalition patrol routes, and what appears to be targeting information for multiple NATO installations." The implications hit the command tent like a physical blow. The Taliban squad hadn't just been random fighters. They'd been intelligence operatives gathering information for a major attack against coalition forces. Williams exchanged glances with Rodriguez. Someone had eliminated a significant threat to NATO operations, someone with the skill and equipment to operate independently in hostile territory, someone who apparently shared their interest in protecting coalition forces. The question that nobody wanted to ask hung in the air like smoke. Who was fighting their war better than they were? Captain Elena Vasquez adjusted her scope for the fourth time in 10 minutes, the familiar ritual providing comfort in the pre-dawn darkness. Through her night vision, the abandoned observation post on Hill 394 appeared empty, just another casualty of a war that had stretched beyond anyone's initial expectations. But thermal imaging didn't lie, and neither did the evidence scattered across the valley floor 12 hours earlier. She'd been tracking the mysterious sniper for 3 days, ever since intelligence reports started filtering through special operations channels about impossible shots and vanishing enemies. As the lead sniper for SEAL Team 6's reconnaissance element, Vasquez had been tasked with what the brass euphemistically called investigation and assessment of the situation. In practical terms, that meant finding whoever was doing their job better than they were, and determining whether they represented an asset or a threat. Falcon 2-6, this is base. You have movement on your eastern approach. The voice in her earpiece belonged to Petty Officer James Sullivan, positioned 800 meters to her south with a Barrett M82 and enough patience to count individual rocks. Vasquez shifted her position, scanning the eastern slope through her scope. The movement was subtle, just a displacement of shadows that suggested human presence. Professional movement, the kind that required years of training to master and decades of experience to perfect. "Base, I have visual," she whispered into her throat microphone. "Single individual approaching from the dead space behind the communications array." The figure moved like liquid mercury across the broken ground, never silhouetting against the skyline, never moving in straight lines that would catch a sniper's eye. Vasquez felt a professional appreciation for the skill level she was witnessing, even as her finger found the familiar comfort of her trigger guard. "Falcon 2-6, can you identify weapons or equipment?" Vasquez studied the approaching figure through her scope's magnification. Custom rifle, definitely military issue, but modified with aftermarket components that spoke of personal investment and professional dedication. Movement patterns suggested special forces training, possibly Marine Corps background based on the way the figure used terrain to mask approach vectors. Base subject appears to be friendly military. Advanced equipment, professional tradecraft. Recommend we attempt contact rather than engagement. Sullivan's response came quickly. Negative, Falcon 2-6. Rules of engagement specify assessment only. We observe and report. Vasquez understood the caution. 3 months of mysterious eliminations had everyone on edge, particularly when the eliminations consistently favored coalition forces over enemy combatants. The Pentagon didn't appreciate mysteries, especially mysteries that operated with lethal efficiency in their area of operations. The figure reached the hide site and began what appeared to be equipment recovery operations. Through her scope, Vasquez watched methodical disassembly of sophisticated shooting positions, careful police of brass casings, and systematic elimination of evidence that anyone had ever occupied the position. Professional, clinical, thorough. Base subject is conducting site sterilization. Estimate 10 minutes until departure. Copy Falcon 2-6. Maintain observation. Vasquez settled deeper into her shooting position, adjusting her scope to track the figure's movements. There was something familiar about the way the person moved, something that nagged at her memory like a half-remembered song. The economy of motion spoke of someone who understood that wasted energy could mean death in combat situations. Then the figure looked directly at her position. Even at 800 meters, even through advanced optics, Vasquez felt the weight of that gaze like a physical presence. The figure didn't wave, didn't signal, didn't acknowledge the surveillance in any obvious way. But there was something in the body language that suggested awareness, recognition, and perhaps even amusement. "Base, I think we've been made," she whispered. The figure completed equipment recovery with the same methodical precision, then began moving northwest toward the valley's exit. But instead of taking the most direct route, the person chose a path that would provide clear visibility of both SEAL positions. A message, Vasquez realized. Not a threat, but a demonstration of awareness and capability. As the figure disappeared into the morning shadows, Vasquez felt a mixture of professional respect and personal curiosity. Whoever was operating in their area possessed skills that matched or exceeded her own team's capabilities, equipment that rivaled anything in the special operations inventory, and most importantly, tactical judgment that consistently aligned with coalition interests. The morning sun crested the mountain peaks, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere in that landscape, a ghost moved with purpose and precision, fighting their war better than they were fighting it themselves. The question was no longer who. It was whether they represented salvation or something far more complicated. Lieutenant Colonel James Rodriguez stood before the assembled task force in Briefing Room Alpha, his weathered face reflecting the gravity of their situation. 3 weeks had passed since the first mysterious eliminations, and the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. 12 separate incidents, 47 enemy combatants eliminated, 0 coalition casualties in areas where this unknown operator had been active. "Gentlemen, ladies," Rodriguez began, his voice carrying across the room filled with the military's elite. "We have a situation that defies conventional explanation." The PowerPoint display showed a map of eastern Afghanistan, dotted with red markers indicating enemy eliminations. Each marker represented what intelligence analysts were calling impossible shots, long-range eliminations that exceeded the demonstrated capabilities of any known coalition assets. Major Patricia Williams sat in the front row, her attention focused on the ballistic analysis displayed on screen. Each shooting incident showed the same characteristics: extreme range, difficult angles, environmental conditions that should have made accurate shooting impossible, and most disturbing of all, tactical awareness that suggested intimate knowledge of enemy positions and capabilities. The individual we're tracking has eliminated more high-value targets in 3 weeks than our combined special operations elements have managed in 6 months, Rodriguez continued. Intelligence suggests these aren't random engagements. They're targeted eliminations of specific threats to coalition operations. Captain Elena Vasquez raised her hand from the third row. Sir, what's our assessment of this individual's capabilities and equipment? Rodriguez nodded toward Williams, who stood to address the question. Based on physical evidence and ballistic analysis, we're looking at someone with advanced military training, possibly special operations background, using customized equipment that exceeds standard military specifications. Range capabilities suggest custom ammunition, advanced optics, and ballistic computers that cost more than most of us make in a year. Murmurs rippled through the assembled officers. The implications were unsettling. Someone operating in their area possessed capabilities that rivaled or exceeded their own elite units. Someone who apparently shared their objectives but operated outside their command structure. What about rules of engagement? Asked Major Tom Bradley from the 75th Ranger Regiment. Are we treating this individual as friendly, hostile, or unknown? Rodriguez exchanged glances with Williams before answering. That's precisely the problem, Major. Every elimination has favored coalition interests. Enemy intelligence operatives, weapons suppliers, high-value targets that we've been trying to locate for months. This individual finds them and eliminates them with surgical precision. The briefing room fell silent as the assembled officers processed the implications. In counterinsurgency warfare, actionable intelligence was more valuable than ammunition, and accurate intelligence was rarer than perfect weather. Someone was providing both through direct action that exceeded their own capabilities. Sir, Vasquez interjected, what if this individual is one of ours? Special access program, deep cover operation, something above our clearance level. Rodriguez shook his head slowly. We've checked through every channel available to us. Special Operations Command, intelligence community, even reached out to our allied partners. Nobody's claiming ownership and nobody's reporting missing assets with this capability level. Williams activated the next slide, showing thermal imagery from Hill 394. This is what we're dealing with: professional-grade hide sites, advanced equipment, tactical awareness that suggests real-time intelligence about enemy movements. Whoever this is, they're not operating blindly. The assembled officers studied the thermal signatures with professional interest. The hide site showed characteristics of advanced military engineering, multiple firing positions, pre-planned escape routes, equipment caches positioned for rapid deployment and extraction. Ma'am, what's our mission posture? Asked Captain Sarah Mitchell from the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. Are we supporting, investigating, or interdicting? The question hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Rodriguez looked around the room at faces that represented decades of combined combat experience, officers who had seen the full spectrum of modern warfare and understood its complexities. For now, we observe and assess, he said finally. But I want everyone to understand, if this individual becomes a threat to coalition operations or personnel, we respond accordingly. Until then, we try to figure out who's fighting our war better than we are. As the briefing concluded and officers filed out in subdued conversation, Williams remained behind, staring at the map display. 47 enemy eliminations in 3 weeks represented a level of tactical success that most units couldn't achieve in 6 months of conventional operations. The question that kept her awake at night was simple. What happened when someone that good decided to change sides? The night air carried the familiar scent of cordite and diesel fuel across forward operating base Kandahar as Captain Elena Vasquez made her way to the communications center. 3 days had passed since the task force briefing, and intelligence reports continued filtering in about impossible shots and vanishing enemies. But tonight's development was different, personal in a way that made seasoned operators question everything they thought they understood about warfare. Falcon 2-6, we need to talk. Major Williams's voice carried an edge that Vasquez recognized from years of combat operations. Something had changed, something that transformed routine investigation into urgent priority. The communications center buzzed with activity as night shift operators monitored radio traffic across the theater. Williams stood before a bank of monitors displaying real-time intelligence feeds, her expression reflecting the gravity of whatever she discovered. "Ma'am, you wanted to see me." Vasquez approached the workstation where Williams was studying what appeared to be personnel files. "Elena, how familiar are you with Operation Copper Canyon?" Williams's question seemed to come from nowhere, referencing a classified mission from 18 months earlier. Vasquez felt ice forming in her chest. Copper Canyon had been a disaster, a deep reconnaissance mission in the Hindu Kush that had gone sideways when intelligence reports proved catastrophically wrong. 3 operators had gone missing, presumed killed when their extraction helicopter was shot down by enemy fire. "Ma'am, I was part of the search and rescue effort. We never recovered the team." Williams nodded grimly, then activated a secure terminal displaying classified personnel records. "Elena, meet Chief Warrant Officer Alexandra Reaper Petrov, Army Special Forces, 5th Special Forces Group. She was the team's sniper for the Copper Canyon mission." The photograph showed a woman in her early 30s with the lean build of a professional soldier and eyes that reflected years of combat experience. Her service record was impressive: multiple deployments, advanced training in precision shooting and reconnaissance, commendations for valor under fire. "Ma'am, the Copper Canyon team was declared KIA after the helicopter went down. We searched the crash site, found wreckage but no survivors." Williams turned to face Vasquez directly. "The helicopter went down, but not where we thought. New intelligence suggests the crash site was 15 kilometers north of our search area, in terrain so remote that even local nationals avoid it." Vasquez studied the photograph, trying to process the implications. "Ma'am, are you suggesting that Chief Petrov survived the crash?" "I'm suggesting," Williams said quietly, "that someone with her exact skill set and training background has been eliminating our enemies with precision that exceeds anything in our current operational capability." The pieces began falling into place with horrifying clarity. The impossible shots, the advanced equipment, the tactical awareness that suggested intimate knowledge of enemy positions, all characteristics consistent with a special forces sniper operating independently in hostile territory. "Ma'am, if Chief Petrov is alive, why hasn't she made contact? Why operate outside command structure?" Williams pulled up another file, medical records that painted a picture of psychological trauma and physical injury that would challenge anyone's faith in military bureaucracy. "Elena, look at her history. 18 months in hostile territory, presumed dead by her own military, no extraction attempt after the initial search was called off." Vasquez felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. She'd seen what prolonged isolation could do to soldiers, how abandonment by their own forces could transform loyalty into something far more complicated and personal. "Ma'am, what are our orders?" Williams closed the files and turned to face the bank of monitors showing real-time intelligence feeds. "We find her, Elena. We find her and we bring her home, or we confirm that the person eliminating our enemies is someone else entirely." The weight of the mission settled on Vasquez's shoulders like familiar equipment. Finding a special forces operator who didn't want to be found, in terrain that had already claimed 3 lives, represented the kind of challenge that separated elite soldiers from everyone else. "Ma'am, when do we deploy?" Williams checked her watch, 0230 hours local time. Wheels up in 4 hours. You'll be working with a joint task force, Rangers for security, aviation assets for mobility, intelligence support for target development. But Alina, she paused, meeting Vasquez's eyes directly. If Chief Petrov is alive and operating independently, approach with extreme caution. 18 months of survival in hostile territory changes people in ways that can't be predicted or easily reversed. As Vasquez left the communications center to prepare for what might be the most important mission of her career, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to encounter something that would challenge everything they understood about loyalty, survival, and the thin line between salvation and revenge. The Hindu Kush mountain stretched endlessly beneath the MH-60 Black Hawk as it carried the joint task force toward coordinates that might finally provide answers to questions that had haunted coalition forces for months. Captain Alina Vasquez checked her equipment for the third time, the familiar ritual providing comfort as they approached terrain that had already claimed too many lives. 5 minutes out, announced Chief Warrant Officer David Park, the helicopter's pilot whose reputation for flying in impossible conditions had earned him the call sign Ghost Rider. Through the aircraft's windows, the landscape below looked like the surface of an alien world, jagged peaks separated by valleys so deep that sunlight never reached their floors. Vasquez keyed her radio to address the team. Final equipment check. We're inserting into terrain where the margin for error is measured in heartbeats, not minutes. The Joint Task Force represented the military's elite, Rangers from the 75th Regiment for Security, an intelligence specialist from the Defense Intelligence Agency for target assessment, and medical personnel trained in combat trauma and psychological evaluation. Each member understood that they might be approaching someone whose survival had required adaptation to conditions that challenged human endurance. Falcon 2-6, this is base, came the transmission from Major Williams back at Kandahar. Latest intelligence suggests movement in grid reference 42 SXD 12,847 67,294. Thermal signatures consistent with human activity, equipment caches, and what appears to be long-term habitation. Vasquez studied her tactical map, cross-referencing the coordinates with terrain features. The location sat astride a mountain pass that commanded visibility across 3 separate valleys, perfect positioning for someone conducting surveillance and interdiction operations against enemy forces. Base, confirm rules of engagement, she replied, knowing that the answer would determine whether this mission ended in reunion or tragedy. Falcon 2-6, you are authorized to make contact and attempt communication. If contact is established with Chief Petrov, your priority is assessment of mental and physical condition, followed by extraction if feasible. If the individual proves hostile or represents a threat to mission security, you are authorized to respond accordingly. The clinical language couldn't mask the reality they all understood. They might be approaching someone whose survival had required psychological adaptations that made normal social interaction impossible. 18 months of isolation, presumed dead by their own military, fighting a personal war against enemies who had tried to kill them, could transform anyone into something unrecognizable. 2 minutes, announced Park as the helicopter banked toward their insertion point. Vasquez looked around at her team members, each lost in personal preparation for what might be the most challenging mission of their careers. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos from the 75th Rangers methodically checked her weapon and ammunition, her movements reflecting years of combat experience in Afghanistan's most dangerous regions. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim from the Navy's Explosive Ordnance Disposal Community reviewed medical protocols for treating trauma victims who might not recognize friendly forces. 30 seconds, Park called out as the Black Hawk flared for landing on a rocky outcropping barely large enough to accommodate the aircraft's rotor disc. The team moved with practiced efficiency, exiting the aircraft and establishing security positions, while Park maintained power for immediate extraction if the situation deteriorated. The thin mountain air made every movement more difficult, and the terrain looked like something designed specifically to kill unwary soldiers. Base Falcon 26 is on the ground, beginning movement to target coordinates. As they began their approach toward what might be Chief Warrant Officer Alexandra Petrov's position, Vasquez couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a situation that would challenge everything they understood about survival, loyalty, and the cost of being forgotten by the institution they'd sworn to serve. The morning sun cast long shadows across the mountainside as the team moved toward answers that nobody was fully prepared to handle. The approach to the target location required 2 hours of movement across terrain that seemed designed by malevolent gods to test human endurance. Captain Elena Vasquez led the joint task force along ridgelines barely wide enough for single-file movement, each step requiring careful placement on loose shale that could send unwary soldiers tumbling into valleys measured in thousands of feet. Falcon 26, you have eyes on target location, came the transmission from the surveillance drone circling high above their position. Thermal imaging shows prepared positions, equipment caches, and what appears to be recent activity. Vasquez signaled for the team to halt, then studied the terrain ahead through her scope. The target area sat nestled in a natural depression that provided concealment from multiple approaches, while offering commanding fields of fire across the surrounding valleys. Professional-grade tactical positioning that spoke of advanced military training and months of careful preparation. Santos, take your element left. Kim, you're with me on the direct approach, she whispered into her throat microphone. Remember, we're attempting contact with a potentially friendly asset, weapons ready but not aggressive. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos moved her rangers into position with practiced silence, their movements coordinated through hand signals that had been refined through years of combat operations. The team understood that they might be approaching someone whose survival instincts had been sharpened to lethal perfection through 18 months of isolation in hostile territory. Vasquez began her approach to the prepared position, her weapon held in a low-ready position that suggested readiness without immediate threat. As she drew closer, details became visible that confirmed their intelligence assessment. This wasn't a temporary fighting position, but a carefully constructed base of operations designed for extended habitation. Unknown friendly, this is Captain Elena Vasquez, United States Navy. I'm approaching your position for communication. Please identify yourself. Her voice carried clearly across the mountain air, professional and calm, despite the tension that made every member of the team hyper-aware of their surroundings. The response came not as words, but as movement, subtle displacement of shadows that suggested someone adjusting position behind carefully constructed cover. Professional movement that indicated training and discipline rather than panic or desperation. Chief Warrant Officer Petrov, if you can hear me, please respond. We're here to help. This time the response was verbal, carried on the thin mountain air with an accent that spoke of Eastern European heritage and voice that reflected months of solitude. Captain, you're in the middle of a kill zone. I suggest you withdraw your people to safer ground before we continue this conversation. Vasquez felt ice forming in her chest. The calm professionalism in that voice was more unsettling than rage or desperation would have been. It suggested someone whose psychological adaptation to isolation had included acceptance of lethal force as a routine communication tool. Chief Petrov, we're here under orders from Major Patricia Williams at FOB Kandahar. We're not here to extract you against your will. We just want to talk. A long pause stretched across the mountainside, broken only by wind moving through the rocks and the distant sound of the surveillance drone circling overhead. When the voice came again, it carried a different quality, something that might have been amusement mixed with professional assessment. Captain, your drone has been circling for 23 minutes. Your sniper element is positioned on the ridge at approximately 800 meters northwest of my position. Your security team is moving through the dead space on my eastern approach. Professional deployment, but you're dealing with someone who's had 18 months to study every rock in this area. Vasquez exchanged glances with Lieutenant Commander Kim, both recognizing that they were dealing with someone whose tactical awareness exceeded anything they'd encountered in conventional military operations. The calm recitation of their positions wasn't a threat. It was a demonstration of capability and awareness. Chief Petrov, can we meet face to face? Just you and me, no weapons, no agenda except conversation. Another pause, this one shorter. Captain, leave your sidearm with your people and approach the rock formation 30 meters to your front. Move slowly, keep your hands visible, and understand that I have 3 different firing positions trained on your location. As Vasquez began her approach to what might be the most important conversation of her military career, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to meet someone who had evolved beyond conventional military parameters into something uniquely adapted to survival in conditions that would break most soldiers. The question was whether that evolution had preserved the person they'd come to find, or transformed her into something else entirely. Chief Warrant Officer Alexandra Petrov emerged from behind the rock formation like a ghost materializing from shadow, her movement so fluid and controlled that Vasquez had to consciously remind herself she was looking at another human being rather than some perfectly adapted predator. 18 months of survival in terrain that challenged human endurance had transformed her into something that seemed carved from the mountains themselves. "Captain Vasquez," she said, her voice carrying the professional calm of someone who had learned to measure words as carefully as ammunition. "You're a long way from the nearest Starbucks." The humor was unexpected, humanizing in a way that made Vasquez realize how much she'd been preparing for something inhuman. Petrov looked like a soldier, lean, alert, equipment worn but meticulously maintained. But there was something in her eyes that spoke of experiences that couldn't be easily categorized or understood. "Chief, we've been tracking your activities for the past month. 47 enemy eliminations, 0 coalition casualties in your area of operations. That's impressive work." Vasquez kept her voice neutral, professional, avoiding any suggestion of judgment or interrogation. Petrov's smile was thin, predatory. 47 confirmed. There have been others, but they happened in areas where your people couldn't document the results. She gestured toward the surrounding mountains with the casual confidence of someone who owned the terrain through intimate knowledge and deadly competence. "Chief, our records show you were declared KIA after the Copper Canyon helicopter went down. How did you survive the crash?" Petrov was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving across the valleys below with the automatic vigilance of someone whose survival depended on constant awareness. "The helicopter didn't crash where your people thought it did, Captain. We went down 15 kilometers north of the search area, in terrain so remote that even the Taliban avoid it." She pointed toward a distant peak barely visible through the morning haze. "My team didn't survive the crash, but I did. Broken ribs, concussion, leg fracture that took 6 weeks to heal properly. By the time I was mobile enough to attempt extraction, your people had declared us KIA and moved on to other priorities." Vasquez felt the weight of institutional failure settling on her shoulders. The military's greatest strength, systematic organization and procedure, had become a weakness when those systems failed to account for variables that couldn't be easily categorized. "Chief, why didn't you attempt to make contact once you were mobile? Signal extraction, radio communication, something to let us know you were alive." Petrov's expression hardened, and for a moment Vasquez glimpsed something that made her understand why enemy forces had developed superstitious fear of this area. "Captain, I tried for 3 months. Emergency radio frequencies, signal fires, ground panels, everything in the survival manual. Your people flew over this area dozens of times without stopping to investigate. The implications hung between them like smoke from a distant fire. Standard search and rescue procedures had time limits, resource constraints, and operational priorities that didn't account for soldiers who survived beyond expected parameters. So you decided to fight your own war, Vasquez observed, the statement carrying no judgment, only professional recognition of tactical adaptation. I decided to make myself useful, Petrov corrected. The Taliban squad that shot down my helicopter has been operating in this area for 8 months, eliminating coalition patrols and intelligence assets. I had the training, equipment, and motivation to do something about it. Vasquez studied the woman in front of her, trying to reconcile the professional soldier with the ghost who had been eliminating enemies with surgical precision for months. Chief, what's your assessment of your current situation? Are you prepared to return to normal military operations? Petrov's laugh was genuinely amused, but there was something hollow in it that spoke of psychological adaptations that might not easily reverse. Captain, normal military operations involve supply chains, command structures, rules of engagement, and bureaucracy. I've been operating without any of those constraints for 18 months. The question isn't whether I'm prepared to return to normal operations. It's whether normal operations are prepared for me. As the conversation continued, Vasquez began to understand that they weren't just dealing with a missing soldier, but with someone who had evolved beyond conventional military parameters into something uniquely adapted to independent operations.